Now, okay, here we go.
You said got it? Good.
Okay, so I really think that, we all know that we need to plan for the future. But sometimes that's hard because we don't want to think about what might happen in the future. And guess what? We're all mortal. But I believe that we can draw that curtain aside and get more peace of mind. Planning is bringing the future into the present so that we can do something about it now. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit about me. Sorry for those of you who've already seen this presentation. I came to Vanderbilt in 1968. The 60s got to Vanderbilt in 1970. This is me as a hippie co-ed, and with the wire rim glasses and the hair parted down the middle. And while I was at Vanderbilt, I married a charming, handsome pediatrician who rode a motorcycle. And then I was out on the job market for a couple of years with my degree in philosophy. And finally I said, well, I know how to go to school. I'd never been in a lawyer's office before, and that's a picture of me graduating from law school with my first daughter in my arms and my mom who got dementia. And Seth, here's the picture. There's your dad, the second from the right. There's your dad. But anyway, I was the first woman hired by any of the big downtown law firms. Seth's dad was the first Jewish lawyer hired by any of those big downtown law firms. And I wanted to be a trial lawyer. And I loved being a trial lawyer. And then I had my second child at this law firm. And then when my girls were 7 and 4, the charming, handsome pediatrician signed the divorce papers on his way to drug rehab. And I was a single mom and a trial lawyer for 22 years. And then 16 years ago, I married this guy who's a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. And psychoanalysts never retire. So I really had to think what I could do because litigation is kind of stressful. So I looked around and saw that the most underrepresented people in Nashville were seniors. And I opened Elder Law of Nashville about 10 years ago. And what I love about this work is taking people's anxiety away because I know what it's like to be anxious. So that's about me. Let's talk about planning for the future. There are 3 components to planning that we need to do. We need to plan to manage our health care. We need to plan to manage our finances. And we need to plan to maintain our standard of living while we manage chronic conditions. So managing healthcare, the first component of planning. Who's going to make decisions if we become incapacitated? We always get to make healthcare decisions as long as we have capacity. But what if we become incapacitated? And the second question is, will our wishes about end-of-life care be honored? So planning for healthcare decisions means having a durable power of attorney for healthcare. And then end-of-life wishes means either a living will or an advance directive. And if you don't do that kind of planning, your family may be forced with getting a conservatorship. Now, in different states, it's called different things. In Tennessee, it's called a conservatorship. Some states call it a guardianship, but it's somebody getting control so that they can manage your healthcare decisions if you haven't appointed an agent. So durable power of attorney for healthcare. First of all, why do they call it durable? Because our law comes from England. And in England, if you had a power of attorney and you got kicked in the head by a horse and you were in a coma, your power of attorney went away. And so they call it durable to distinguish it from the power of attorney that you had in England. Now, I also have to tell you that lawyers in England were paid by the word. And now, if you wonder why lawyers call it will and final testament, or whatever, when lawyers say blah blah blah, just remember that lawyers were paid by the word in England. So there you go. when you do, now in some states it's called a healthcare proxy. But when you sign a power of attorney for healthcare matters to let somebody help you if you become incapacitated, it lets you choose who's going to make those decisions. And it gives you the opportunity to talk with your family about your wishes. Now, my dad and mom, back in those days, people in that era didn't talk to their families about what they wanted. But I'm a great believer in talk to your family about these decisions. Talk to them about which of them you're choosing to name as an agent to make healthcare decisions for you. Sometimes people say to me, oh, I want to name all my children as my agent. And I say, have your children ever fought? And this is not an honor. This person might have to make the decision to disconnect the machines. So this is a chance to say, oh, I picked your sister to do the agent for financial decisions because she's a banker, and I picked your brother because he's a doctor, whatever. It gives you a chance to talk to your children about what you've decided. Now, end of life wishes. The three most important cases in America, the Quinlan case, the Nancy Cruzan case, and the Terry Schiavo case, are all women who were in their 20s who became brain dead and they had no written plan for what they wanted for end of life wishes. The most famous one of those cases was, well, for lawyers, was Nancy Cruzan. It was a woman in Missouri who was in an automobile accident. And when they fished her out of a puddle, she was thrown from the car. When they fished her out of a puddle of water, she was brain dead. Terry Schiavo, you may remember this woman in Florida. She, I think, had an eating disorder and became brain dead. So each of them had no written plan, and over 2/3 of the adult population of the U.S. doesn't have a living will or an advance directive. And when I married Tom Campbell 16 years ago, I dragged him through every bit of this planning. So I believe in this planning. So a living will, lawyers started drafting those after the Cruzan case. And it lets you put into writing your desire not to be kept alive by artificial means. And the problem with living wills is they usually only cover two conditions: a coma, or you're in the end stages of a terminal illness. And so that's the problem. It doesn't cover dementia. And that's what I'm the most fearful about. So a living will, though, typically covers if you're in a coma or you have a terminal condition, and you can direct that you would die naturally and that you would not be nourished by IV fluids. Now, here's the deal. Nobody kills you, and you always get everything you want to eat and drink, and you always get pain management. This is about if you're in a condition that you would not want to be kept alive in. Tennessee has a form called an advance directive, and it lets you express your wishes about 4 different conditions: a coma, a permanent unconscious condition, the end stages of an end stage illness, permanent confusion, when you can no longer recognize your loved ones or have a clear conversation with them, and if you're dependent in all activities of daily living. And if any of those conditions are unacceptable to you, you wouldn't want to be kept alive by heroic measures. You can then say whether you do or don't want CPR, you do or don't want life support like a ventilator, you do or don't want treatment for a new condition, and you do or don't want IV fluids and tube feeding. This form, this is the one time when I'm saying you can go online and get a form. You can go to the Tennessee government website, search for advance directive, and get this form. Otherwise, I don't think you ought to use online document websites. You just don't know enough. I mean, if we could prescribe for ourselves instead of having doctors prescribe for us, would we do it? Yes. But is that a good idea? No. So, you know, this form though, I think might be a good idea, especially if you don't have this already done. And these forms are not self-effectuating. And again, it's a good idea to talk about what you want with your healthcare agent. Now, the second thing we have to plan for is our finances. There are 3 questions here. Who's going to make decisions again if we become incapacitated? How are we going to afford healthcare, home care, assisted living, or nursing home care? And then what happens to our assets when we die? Those are the 3 questions we need to plan for in terms of our finances. So again, decision making, you got to do a power of attorney for financial matters. It's also called a general power of attorney. And if you don't, your family's going to end up having to get a conservator. It's a myth that your spouse automatically has the power. I mean, yes, if you have a joint checking account with your spouse, they can write checks on the account, make deposits to the account, but your spouse can't sign you into a nursing home, sign contracts on your behalf, make decisions on your behalf. So again, this power of attorney lets you choose who's going to make financial decisions. It gives you a chance to discuss those decisions with your agent. So maybe you say, well, there's this stock I got from my grandfather. I'd really like to see us keep that, or it's really important to me for your mom to be taken care of, whatever. It gives you a chance to talk about that with your agent, and it allows for comprehensive planning. Now, if you don't have these documents in place, in Tennessee, your family is going to have to hire a lawyer to draft a petition to appoint a conservator. A doctor who's seen you in the last 90 days has to fill out a form that's notarized. If you haven't seen a doctor in the last 90 days, the judge can order you to see a doctor. And then a second lawyer is appointed who's called the guardian ad litem. And that lawyer's job is to say to the court, do you need a conservator? And if so, whom should it be? But now, if you're ornery and demented, and I'm planning to be ornery and demented, then you're going to say to this guardian ad litem, I don't need a conservator. And wow, that's so common for people to say, I don't need a conservator, even when they do. And then the judge has to appoint another lawyer, because we can't take your rights away unless you're represented. So you're 3 lawyers deep now. And, you know, and even then your family may fight over who's going to be the conservator. And this can be a really expensive process, and you don't want to see your money go to this. So my suggestion is do the planning. And this form you need to consult a lawyer. An expert needs to assess your family situation, your assets. Does your family fight? What are the costs that are involved? How comprehensive should this form be? Should it give your family or your agent the ability to give some of your assets away if you need to be on Medicaid? There's a lot of questions that a lawyer needs to answer. Now, what about affording healthcare, home care, assisted living, or nursing home care? I don't believe that we fear public speaking more than death. But when seniors say they fear outliving their money more than death, I kind of think they might, because I've got that bag lady thing going on in the back of my mind. So I think we do need to plan for how we're going to afford healthcare, home care, or assisted living or nursing home care. Now, these are the numbers in the Nashville area from 2022. So a private room in a nursing home in the Nashville area costs about $98,000 a year. A private room, $90,000 a year. Assisted living, $50,000 a year. Adult day services, $22,000. Then home health aides and companion homemakers cost about $59,000 a year, but that's only 45 hours of care a week. Now, us seniors say, oh, we want to die at home. But the problem is there aren't enough people to take care of us if we're all going to die at home. And even if there were enough people, there's not enough money, because if we get to the point where we need 24/7 care at home, that costs about $250,000 a year. The percentage of the population 65 and older is now 16.5%. And the anticipated growth of this population by 2032 is 46%. And there are only 5 buckets of money to pay for healthcare once we retire. There are our private assets, Medicare, Medicaid, long-term care insurance, and VA aid and attendance benefits. So we're going to go through these one by one, kind of quickly, to give you an idea of how we need to plan for paying for our health care in retirement. So private assets includes uncompensated help from families, which is a lot of money. And there's nothing really complicated about our private assets, except for one thing, which is reverse mortgages. Reverse mortgages are mortgages on our home, and that's the only security that the bank has, not our personal money, just our home. You can get this as a lump sum, a line of credit, or a fixed monthly amount. And the youngest homeowner has to be at least 62. And when the last person that's on this mortgage dies, sells the home, or moves out, the mortgage becomes payable. And there are some fees and costs for this. But once again, I don't really recommend reverse mortgages very often, because, unless you're really old, you need to be thinking about congregate care. Now, if your aunt is 96 years old and she is still living at home, then I might send you to look at a reverse mortgage. Otherwise, probably not. Okay, long-term care insurance. Only 10% of people 65 and older have long-term care insurance. It's become more of an asset preservation strategy than it is a way of paying for nursing home care, or assisted living, maybe because it's too expensive. When I bought long-term care insurance, the only kind they had was the kind where you pay and pay and pay, and you might or might not need it. Now there are a lot of different ways to pay for it. Most policies begin to pay if you need help with 2 activities of daily living. Now there are policies that are a combination of whole life insurance and long-term care insurance. Now there are long-term care policies that you can even pay for with what you call qualified money, which is your IRAs, your 401ks, and your 403bs. So there's a lot of different kinds now. All right, so we're to our third bucket of money, which is Medicare. Medicare is the federal health insurance program for people 65 and older. There are some people younger than 65 who qualify. If you get on Social Security disability, which is for people who have worked during their lifetime, 2 years after you qualify for SSDI, you are automatically on Medicare. People with permanent kidney failure and people with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. But let's talk about what Medicare is. Medicare Part A is premium free. It helps pay for inpatient care in a hospital or nursing facility to some extent. To some small extent, it can help pay for a skilled nursing facility. It pays for some home health care and hospice care. Beneficiaries share costs through deductibles and copays. That's Part A. Part B pays for doctor's services, outpatient medical services. It's technically optional. There's an annual deductible and a 20% copay. Then there's a penalty for late enrollment in Plan B. I'm not going to go through exactly how that's calculated, but you need to know that whenever you can sign up for Part B, you need to sign up for Part B. And it's a pretty good deal, $166 a month to pay for health insurance. Good plan. Part C, this year, for the first time, there are as many people on Part C plans as there are traditional Medicare. Now, you may see that Part C is advertised. You may have noticed that Part C is advertised. That's because private insurance companies do Part C. It's Part A and B is just the government. So, of course, insurance companies are out there advertising. So private insurance companies wanted to be in on the market, and they convinced the government to do this. And so I'm going to pick a number out of the air. I'm going to say, let's say you enroll in a Part C plan and the government pays the insurance company, let's say $10,000 a year for every person they enroll. Well, who do these insurance plans want? They want healthy people. So they have gym memberships, and they want to drag in those healthier people. They advertise, blah blah blah. I don't know whether it's a good idea. These are generally HMO plans. Because I travel a lot, I did not sign up for a Part C plan. I'm told that for healthier people, they're a good idea, but they might have a serious disadvantage when you end up late down the road. The maximum out-of-pocket cost for an Advantage plan is $8,300 in 2023. Finally, there's a prescription drug plan, private insurance for drugs that are federally regulated. Medigap policies. If you have traditional Medicare, people often get a Medigap policy. They're numbered. They have letters A through N. If Medicare pays, the plan pays. So there's no underwriting to it. And at one time, Gerber, the baby food company, had a Medigap policy. Okay. So what is here's what people don't understand. What is Medicare? Medicare doesn't pay for assisted living. Medicare doesn't pay for people to come in and help you if you need caregivers every day, 5 days a week. And it doesn't really pay for nursing home care either. If you've been actually admitted to a hospital for 3 midnights, not admission for observation, but admitted, Medicare will pay 100% of the first 20 days of rehab. If you still need rehab, Medicare will pay part of the next 80 days. But at day 101, Medicare pays nothing for a nursing home. So if you need to be in a nursing home, yeah, Medicare is not going to pay anything past 100 days. So we've come around to government benefits, and you can see why government benefits are such a big deal. Private assets, I don't know, us baby boomers may or may not have saved up for health care, long-term care insurance, Medicare. So now we're around to government benefits. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about VA aid and attendance. It's also known as the improved pension plan. There are a lot of wartime veterans that might be eligible for this benefit. There are a lot of people who could be eligible that are not getting this benefit. So the full aid and attendance amounts in 2023 up to $31,000, well, more than $31,000 for a married veteran, $26,000 a year for a single veteran, and the surviving spouse of a veteran can qualify for $17,000 a year, and these amounts are not taxable. There are 4 requirements to get this: duty in the military, sick enough, your income has to be low enough, and your assets have to be low enough. Duty in the military, you have to have had at least 90 days of active duty. We just had a case come in today where our clients were saying, well, my stepdad was in the reserve. Well, that's not going to count. At least one of those 90 days has to be during a defined period of war until you get to Gulf War veterans, which is going to require 24 months of active duty, discharge other than dishonorable. So here are the defined periods of war. So just to give you an idea, my dad was a World War II veteran. He was a veterinarian, so he inspected cheese in Wisconsin. He wasn't in the war theater, and he qualifies. You don't have to have been in the war theater if you sign up to serve our country during a wartime, during a defined period of war, except there's this period at the very beginning of the Vietnam War, 61 to 64, when I think we hadn't really admitted that we were at war. And in that one period, you have to have had boots on the ground. I'm not going to go over sick enough. You have to have 2 activities of daily living. I'm not going to go over income. This is just something you need to look into. If you or a family member, a loved one is sick and you're a veteran during a defined period of war. Okay, now we have come around to Medicaid, the 5th bucket of money. Medicaid pays for 60% of the nursing home care in the United States. It pays for 60% of nursing home care in Tennessee. It's not people who started, it's not necessarily people who are poor, it's for people who qualify. It's a joint federal state program. And when the laws were first passed in the 60s, they said, you states can interpret these laws however you want. Well, maybe not however you want, but you states can interpret these laws. And because of that, Medicaid is different in every state. It's very hard to research Medicaid because it's just different. So TennCare, we call it TennCare here in Tennessee. Different states have come up with different names for it. There are 2 programs that people can qualify for. Choices 1 is for people who are in nursing homes. Choices 2 is for people who meet the exact same qualifications to be in a nursing home, but their families still want to take care of them at home. And this is home and community-based services. And TennCare, if you meet these qualifications, the same exact qualifications, you can get up to about $6,500 a month to take care of your loved one at home. So choices 1 and choices 2. There are 3 requirements. You have to be sick enough, your income has to be low enough, your assets have to be low enough. Sick enough is the hard part. Sick enough is the hard part. In Tennessee, we're a low tax, low service state. You have to meet a certain score on a pre-admission evaluation. So you have to get points for you can't get out of bed on your own. You can't walk on your own. You can't pick up finger food and eat it. You have problems with continence and can't change your own diaper. You're not oriented to who you are and where you are. You can't follow simple directions or make simple statements about what you need. You can't give yourself your own medicine, or you have difficult behaviors. And this has become the hardest part. Now, income limits. Whose income? Well, it's the person who needs to be in the nursing home or is sick enough to be in the nursing home. Tennessee is what they call an income cap state. So you might go on the website of TennCare and they say, well, if you have more, if the person who's going into the nursing home has more than $2,742 a month in income, you don't qualify. Well, what's that about? because nursing homes cost $9,500 a month. Well, the answer is there's an easy fix to this, so we're not going to spend any more time on it. You just have to create a separate kind of trust to put the money in, part of your income in. So let's go on from income to assets. If you're single, you can only have $2,000 in assets. Now, even this is complicated because there are some assets that don't count, like your home. There's a lot of assets that do count. There are transfers that penalize you. There are transfers that don't penalize you. Now, if you're a married couple, TennCare adds up all the countable assets. Now, this is one of the best kept secrets in America. In the 80s, Congress was reading stories in the newspaper about women being so impoverished by putting their husbands on to Medicaid that they were eating cat food. And we had a client who worked at Kroger during this period, and she saw women coming in to buy cat food because they couldn't afford to eat. So Congress passed the Anti-Spousal Impoverishment Act. And this is designed to keep the spouse at home from being utterly impoverished. So if you need TennCare adds up the countable assets of both spouses. The spouse who's at home, called the community spouse, can keep half of those assets with a minimum. These numbers go up every year, so I don't memorize them. But this year it's a minimum of about 30,000 and a maximum of about 149,000. The institutionalized spouse has to spend down to 2,000. And in some circumstances, the income from the spouse in the nursing home can be shifted to that community spouse. So here's an example. A married couple owns a house worth $150,000, one vehicle, and $100,000 in stocks and bonds. Dad is going into the nursing home. The house and the car are non-countable assets, so they don't count. And you look at the $100,000, it's split in half. Mom gets to keep $50,000. Dad gets to keep $2,000, and they have to spend down $48,000. Now, are there alternatives for people who have less money? Yep, there are. Are there alternatives for people who have more money? Yes, there are. They're pretty complicated. This is not a do-it-yourself project. If somebody, and if we have clients that need to go in a nursing home, we help them do the spend down, and then we help them do the estate planning so that they get to try to save as much money as possible for the spouse at home and the children. Now, you may have heard that there's a 5-year look back for Medicaid. I wish they hadn't named both of those words so much the same. There's a 5-year look back for Medicaid TennCare here in Tennessee. On the day that you apply, they say, have you given any money away in the last 5 years? And if so, it creates a penalty. And it's calculated as the amount of money given away that's divided by a certain amount. And for that many months, you have to pay privately. There's also something called estate recovery. And, you know, TennCare or Medicaid is going to try to recover when assets go through probate. And there are also, if you have time to, if you have 5 years, so let's say somebody's in the early stages of Alzheimer's, they can put money into an irrevocable trust, and that money 5 years from, it's a gift. You got to make it 5 years, and 5 years from now, that money has disappeared. Or if you don't make it 5 years, we can unwind the trust and come up with another plan. All right. Irrevocable trust. We're going to talk about estate planning now. What happens to your stuff when you die? So wills control the disposition of your assets when you die. Do you need a will? Well, maybe. If you hold everything, all your assets with the right of survivorship, everything you have, you hold with your spouse, those assets are automatically going to pass to your spouse. But then someday your spouse is going to die. I've got news for you. We're all mortal. So bank accounts and real property is typically owned with right of survivorship. If you don't have a will, your state has a plan for what happens to your assets when you die. It's called intestate no will succession. In Tennessee, if you have only a surviving spouse, your surviving spouse gets it. If you have only children and no spouse, your children split it up. If you have a spouse and one child, they each get half. If you have a spouse and two or more children, your spouse gets a third and your children split up the other 2/3. You might think, oh, well, my spouse is going to get it all so she can take care of my kids. Not necessarily. So a will, I think a will is a good idea because it helps you consult with a lawyer, you define the issues, you consider the possibilities. And even if you just say, well, yeah, I want my spouse to get it all, and then blah, 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 you can also waive bond and make it just easier for your kids or your spouse someday. Now, what I talked a minute ago about an irrevocable trust. But now we're going to talk about a revocable trust. A will is a book of instructions that takes place when you die. A revocable trust is a book of instructions that takes place when you die. A will, though, you have to go through probate. A trust, if you put your assets into the trust, doesn't have to go through probate. You're the grant. It's like you still own these assets. You're the grantor of the trust. You're the trustee of the trust. You're the beneficiary of the trust. If you decide you don't like what you did in your revocable trust, you revoke it and all your assets are yours again. A lot of people come to me and say, well, I've been told I need to avoid probate. Well, yes and no. There are some really good points about trusts. The drawbacks are you may pay a little bit more on the front end. The court isn't supervising the process of distributing your money. There's no process for notifying creditors. It may be a little bit longer wait to sell real property, and you've got to put money into the name of the trust. That's the drawback of the trust. But the good side of the trust is that they're private. It's not an invitation to your family, hey, come sue us here if you don't like what the will did. It's sometimes cheaper or easier for your beneficiaries when you die. And especially if you're worried about your spouse's care, if you might die first, trust can be a good idea. Okay, that's estate planning. The third component of planning is to plan to maintain our standard of living. Finding help with legal planning, income, housing, and other resources, finding help with managing chronic conditions. More than a quarter of all Americans and 2 out of 3 older Americans suffer from multiple chronic conditions. The percentage of older Americans with multiple chronic conditions is increasing. 125 million Americans out of our 331 million American population has chronic conditions. 40 million people are limited by them. And at the turn of the last century, when our life expectancy was 50, we were really concerned about setting up our children as we age. We were concerned about leaving assets to our children. But now that we live into our 70s and 80s, our real concerns are accessing quality healthcare and living independently and maintaining mobility and addressing the fear of being isolated. Wow, that was especially true during COVID. Addressing the fear of going broke, protecting the at-home spouse, and maximizing the legacy for our loved ones. So in this process of planning, everybody's got a lawyer except the senior. So what we do is something called life care planning. It's not for younger people whose most pressing concerns are naming a guardian for minor children. Seth, I'm looking at you. And setting up a trust for those young kids. It's not, life care planning is not really necessarily for healthy older people. What we do for those people is to do the legal and financial planning. It's really for unhealthy older people, the legal, the financial, and the personal planning, the helping people manage healthcare. So who needs that kind of a team? Families who've started down the road of one crisis after another, seniors with children who live out of town, orphaned adults. Wow, I'm not sure that orphaned adults is even a good term for it anymore, because there's so many of us now that don't get married and don't have kids. Families with a high level of anxiety, families with a level of conflict. And what happens in a life care planning firm, the people who need life care planning are assigned a nurse or a licensed social worker as a care coordinator. Lawyers or people, what I learned when I was a trial lawyer is that normal people can't afford lawyers because of something called the billable hour. So we don't charge by the billable hour, we charge a flat fee. And we bring the estate planning documents up to date. We help you manage care. We help people avoid common mistakes. We provide guidance. It's a concierge service for elder needs. So what we do, we get seniors Medicaid and veterans benefits. We work with financial planners. We set our clients up with a Medicare insurance specialist. We find placement. We defend vulnerable seniors. We answer off the wall questions. We plan for income and estate taxes. We help with the transition and living arrangements. We help people find assisted living facilities, nursing homes, care companies. We plan for people to stay at home with the right support. We attend care plan meetings. Nashville is a relationship town. We leverage our relationships to get our clients the best services. We go right down to the wire with helping with hospice care and planning for funeral arrangements. So we believe we're all just walking each other home, quoting Ram Dass there. I've noticed that my one of my class members from undergraduate school is here. She knows who Ram Dass is. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to open up for questions. And feel free to shout it out. Or you can put your questions in the chat, either one. And I'm gonna pause for a minute because I've taught at Vanderbilt Law School, I've taught at Nashville School of Law. I've taught hundreds of courses to lawyers, and I just don't want to waste your time. I want to give you lots of information.
With the housing costs being increased, can you give an example of a more expensive house in that formula that you gave?
I'm sorry, the housing costs in Nashville are crazy. So tell me what your question is again, Helen.
Okay, so with that example, the house was worth $150,000.
Oh yeah,
Can you give an example?
Yeah, that wasn't in Nashville. But, okay, so you have a house in Nashville. It's worth $500,000. It is a non-countable asset, so it doesn't count against you if you need Medicaid. Yeah, it just doesn't even count as an asset. So, if you're a single person, you still got to spend down to where you have under $2,000 in countable assets. That's pretty typical across the country for Medicaid for single people. Yeah. But if you're married, it's a different situation because of the anti-spousal impoverishment.
So say, for instance, joint income of two married people is 10,000 a month. Can you do a spend down on that?
Well, income is not assets. Income, the spouse that's going into the nursing home, well, maybe one spouse is making 9,000 a month and maybe the other spouse is only making 1,000 a month. The spouse that's going into the nursing home, I'd say you can get some of that income shifted to the spouse at home, but let's turn it around. The spouse that's going into the nursing home is only making $1,000 a month of income. You know what? Their income is going to go to the nursing home, but the spouse that's making 9,000 a month is going to get to keep their entire income. Now, assets is something different. They add up the assets of both spouses to see if you're, where you fit in and whether you're going to have to spend down. If you're a single person, it's just your assets they're adding up. And if you have more than 2,000, you're going to have to spend down. If it's a married couple, they add it up and you split it in half. If it's under a certain amount, the spouse at home gets to keep it all. If it's over a certain amount, it's going to be split half and half, and then there you go. Right now, if you have $300,000, for example, in total assets, the spouse at home, the community spouse, would keep 150, about 150, and the spouse going into the nursing home would have to spend down to 2,000. There are Medicaid-friendly ways to spend down. In every state, there are Medicaid-friendly ways to spend down.
Okay, take for instance a single person going into the nursing home.
Yeah.
They only have one home, one house.
Right.
The
house is not countable.
Okay, and say they have 30,000 in a savings account.
Okay, they've got to spend down to 28,000. Now, there are Medicaid-friendly ways to spend down. One, and they're different in different states, but for example, just about everywhere, a pre-need burial contract is not countable. So you can spend some of that money on a burial plan. It has to be itemized, it has to be irrevocable. And there are other ways to spend. You can, another non-countable asset is a car. So there are ways to spend down. It just depends. You can also make a gift and set up a penalty period and get an annuity. I mean, it can get really complicated, but there are ways to spend down. The important part to know about Tennessee is you got to be sick enough. Now, my friend Betsy is in Georgia, and they're going to have different rules about how you can spend down and, what you can spend on, and it be Medicaid friendly. It's just different in every state. That's what makes this practice of law so hard.
What is the average cost of life care planning per month?
We do a flat fee. We do a flat fee. And it kind of is, do you need Medicaid? Do you not need Medicaid? It really depends on the circumstance. It's not a monthly charge, it's a yearly charge. And then to stay, after the first year, we charge about 25% of it's very front end loaded in terms of the thinking and the planning and the documents, and the work is very much sort of crammed into that first year. If you want to stay in our hearts and on our minds, it's 25% of that for each year after that.
Okay, you can't put a house that you don't own outright in a revocable trust, can you?
No, you have to, well, no, you have to own it. You have to own the house to put it in the trust, or
So
jointly
you
own
can,
it, and the two of you put it in a trust.
you can't have a mortgage on it.
Oh, no, you can have a mortgage on it and put, well, you know, mortgage companies aren't real happy when you put it in an irrevocable trust. You
What
know,
about a revocable? A revocable?
oh, they're fine with a revocable trust. They're fine with it's a revocable trust is just another kind of will. Well, revocable trust came along, you know, probate is different in every state. I'm told that in California, you can't probate anything for under $30,000. In Davidson County, lawyers, the only way they get paid is to charge an hourly fee. In Florida, the court and the lawyers take a percentage of your estate. So probate is different in every place. Some states, it makes a whole lot more sense to use a revocable trust. Trusts make it easy for your heirs. But you know, they're kind of hard in the sense that you've got to deed that house into the trust. You've got to put your accounts in the name of the trust. It's more difficult and more expensive to have a revocable trust generally than just a will. These are good questions, Helen.
Hey, Barbara.
I wanted to be a lawyer.
There you go. There you go. Hey, Eleanor.
Hey, I wanted to ask you a question about, oh, you've told us so much and I appreciate it. But what I wondered about is if you're living, like as far as assets go, if you're living on money that you have, that you're taking out of an IRA or a 401k, those are considered assets, are they not?
They are considered assets.
So if your spouse was to need a nursing home and he ended up going to a, you know, he would have to spend those down into 2000, is that right? Or
Well, there's a way to avoid doing that. You can transfer those assets into a Medicaid compliant annuity.
okay.
I guess one thing to know about, one thing to think about when you have, all right, so I'm an American. You know, I remember when the stock market was under $1,000. Raise your hand. Okay. Okay, so the stock market took off when they created IRAs and 401ks.
Right.
That's when the stock market took off. And so us people back then went like, oh yeah, okay, we're going to put it all in an IRA, a 401k. And so I'm like most Americans in this category. I've got money in housing and qualified money. Okay. Nobody ever, you always know, save and save and save and save. Nobody ever tells you, hey, now is the time to think about spending. But if you're thinking about spending your saved up assets versus your 401, your qualified money that's never had income tax paid on it, you need to think about the fact that you might be in the lowest tax bracket for income taxes. I mean, your kids, if you die and leave this money to them, they're going to have to take it out within 10 years. Their tax bracket might be higher. Now might be the time to be thinking about using those 401k IRA money, because you're in a lower tax bracket now that you've retired and your income is down.
If your spouse goes to the nursing home and he's drawing Social Security and you're drawing Social Security, you still get that? Or
well, his Social Security goes to the nursing home. You get to keep your Social Security.
Okay.
Income is different than assets. You get to keep your income. And as a matter of fact, your spouse goes into the nursing home. You go through all this trouble. You get him on Medicaid, and then you win the lottery. It's your money.
Okay.
So let's all plan to win the.
So what about, you said that you get to keep your house and your car. So if you know he's getting ready to go to the nursing home and you have an older car and you go replace it with a newer one, are they going to frown on that?
No, as a matter of fact, that's a good way to spend down. So you get ready, you're about, you know that don't wait to call a lawyer. Don't, call the lawyer. And then the lawyer might say, well, we've got to spend down 100,000. Let's upgrade his car. Maybe not a Maserati, but let's just upgrade his car.
Why not?
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Barbara, I have years ago, about a year after my first wife passed away, I did do an estate plan through Tim Takis, but it's outdated, and Ellie, she doesn't have a plan. So what do we need to do to
Right,
get something planned together?
he's
All right.
got children and I've got children, so we want to make sure and everything's cut and dry. So
You know what? Okay, so when I married Tom Campbell, I had 2 children. He has 3 children. They all live in Nashville. Gonna
Mhm.
say we won the parenthood lottery here, but you know what his kids were thinking? If he dies first, her kids will get it all.
That's true. That's how it
So-
works.
So I dragged my husband through every bit of this planning. And we gave we gave a copy to everyone, and I'm sure they lost it, but they know they're going to be treated fairly.
Right.
So life care planning is not the only thing we do. We also do something called Partners in Planning, where we do the estate planning for people. So yeah, come see us. Come see us, my friend.
Okay.
I've known Eleanor forever. Her
You
dad.
you know how much trouble it has been for me with
I know.
and I want
know.
to I want to make it not happen again.
I know. Let's not make that's especially for blended families.
Right.
So when I was a trial lawyer, my motto was living well is the best revenge. But now my motto is hurt no feelings in death.
Right.
Hurt no feelings in death. Because you know what? Children don't fight over greed as much as they fight over hurt feelings.
Right.
So my thing is do the estate planning, treat them fairly, unless there's a reason. In our culture, money is kind of the equivalent of love. Don't treat them, and you might say, well, one child has been more successful, but how's it going to feel when you give the unsuccessful child more money?
Yeah.
I'm not in favor of doing that. Treat your children equally. Now, if one of them is disabled, that's a different story. But if
So how do you pick one as power of attorney?
well, that's hard too, but at least explain it. One of my children is a banker,
Yeah.
The other one has a softer heart,
Mhm.
And have that conversation with them, because
Right.
here's what I tell people. Here's how my 2 daughters opened their Christmas presents. I'm just showing you. It's Christmas present. I don't know whose family doesn't have the potential for hurt feelings.
Right.
Maybe if you only have one child, it's not that big a deal. But even then, I once represented. I was involved in a family. They always told their 3 children, we're going to do it a third, a third, a third. And then dad died. And then the last year of her life, mom changed it to 40% to the boy and 30% to each of the girls. They were $70,000 of litigation in when I said, wait a minute, I'm out of here. You don't want that money to be wasted, but people fight.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Well, we've reached 6 o'clock. It's so lovely to see all of you. And even the ones that you can't see, I can see your name, even if I can't see your face. It's so
One quick
lovely to
question.
see you. It's so lovely to see you. And we're going to be doing this once a month. And the next thing, actually, lawyers help families with a disabled family member. Hey, Betsy. Lawyers help people with disabled family members. Hey, Betsy, did you see that picture from when I married Pete? We go back so far.
Can you take
that too?
So
You said-
we'll be doing a webinar next month on how to help families with disabled family members. It's the same questions, where are they going to live? How are they going to get income?
I got one quick question.
Okay.
What is an example of a qualified Medicaid annuity?
It has to be actuarially sound. So it cannot be longer than the life expectancy of the person that is the annuitant. Okay. It can't have balloon payments, and it needs to name Medicaid as the secondary beneficiary. It's pretty complicated, in other words. Yeah, but that's a
So
qualified.
I would be the beneficiary and Medicaid would be the second beneficiary.
Now, if you're the one going into, if you're a single person going into a nursing home, you might make a gift to your children. It would create a penalty period. You would buy an annuity that would pay the nursing home during the penalty period, and your kids would get to keep the gift or put it in a trust for you to pay for any extra expenses that Medicaid's not paying for. So there is a way to use annuities for both single people and married people. You should have been a lawyer, Helen. You could still go back to law school. I'm just saying.
Just saying. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You're gonna
All right,
notify us about
everybody.
the next one?
Pardon me?
You're gonna notify us about the next
Yes,
one?
I am. If you were on the email list from MailChimp this time, we're going to start doing a newsletter, which is going to be a story, a personal story of me or Adam. Adam, my young lawyer, is on this. And you might have seen this last story was about Jason Isbell. Not that I know Jason Isbell, about the Jason Isbell song Elephant, but we're gonna be doing a newsletter that's a personal story and an invitation to a webinar twice a month. I mean, the webinar is once a month, the newsletter is twice a month. Okay, everybody. Bye. Have a great evening. Great Labor Day weekend. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Next time I get one of those, we'll probably need to set.
Hey, Barbara,
Hey.
you can make me the host. Oh, there we go. Perfect. That was excellent.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Betsy was she was my roommate at that co-ed dorm.
Wow.
And Seth Kaplan. Oh my God. His dad is Mike Kaplan. You've heard me talk about Mike
I
Kaplan.
have heard you talk about Mike.
And
Yeah.
Seth is he was born without pigment in his cones and rods.
Oh,
So he's has difficulty seeing. Seth is, and Seth, when he was 2 months old, I was standing there and we walked out and Pete said, "Barbara, I think that child can't see." I love him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, hey, stop the recording.
Oh, pause.